I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate. We think too much and feel too little. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness. Without these qualities, life will be violent. And all will be lost, all will be lost. Do not despair, the hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people, Let us all unite, let us fight for a new world, to do away with greed. Now let us fight to free the world, to fulfill that promise. Let us all unite.
You're in the Corporation Nation. I'm your host, Clint Richardson. And joining me today is the illustrious, the infamous Walter Burien of Kafir1.com, a gentleman that I consider a friend and mentor. And I want to get right into it today. The first thing I want to talk about with Walter is, well, I want to dispel a few fallacies, I suppose, about gold and about the Federal Reserve. And so I wanted to start off by reading from the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, from their website, which is federalreserve.gov, facts and currency. And it's in the form of a question and an answer. It says, is U.S. currency still backed by gold? Now, I know I have an educated audience, and they know that the dollar is not, quote-unquote, backed by gold. But what is the dollar? What's sitting there is the question. So it says the answer from the Fed is that the Federal Reserve notes are not redeemable in gold, silver, or any other commodity. This means, of course, that you can't trade in your dollar for a commodity. In fact, you are the commodity. Federal Reserve notes have not been redeemable in gold since January 30th, 1934, when the Congress amended Section 16 of the Federal Reserve Act to read, the said Federal Reserve notes shall be obligations of the United States. Remember that. That's a very important term. Federal Reserve notes shall be obligations of the United States. They shall be redeemed in lawful money on demand at the Treasury Department of the United States in the city of Washington, District of Columbia, or at any Federal Reserve bank. Federal Reserve notes have not been redeemable in silver since the 1960s. Goes on to say the Congress has specified that Federal Reserve banks must hold collateral equal in value to the Federal Reserve notes that the Federal Reserve Bank puts into circulation. This collateral, another very important word, is chiefly held in the form of U.S. Treasury, federal agency, and government-sponsored enterprise securities. So the question that the fallacy that we have to dispel here is the difference between something that is backed and redeemable and something that is collateralized. They are two different legal terms. Now, Walter actually wrote a wonderful article which was titled, "So You Want a Gold-Backed Currency? The 50-year plan is coming to a close." And before we get to Walter, I just want to read one more little thing. And this is actually out of, the Federal Reserve Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, of which Walter is the guru, if you will. Again, me, his student. Gold, this is a quote, gold is valued at the statutory price of $42.29 per fine troy ounce. So this is the statutory price that the government agreed with the Federal Reserve to put on gold. The number of fine troy ounces was 261,498,900 troy ounces as of September 30th, 2010 and 2009. Now, this is actually the 96th, if I'm not mistaken, audit of the Federal Reserve. That is what the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report is. Yes, I said audit. Gold, sorry. The market value of gold in the London fixing was $1,307 per fine troy ounce at the close of September 30th, 2010. Of course, we know that fluctuates. But see, this is not valued at the market price. It's valued at the statutory price of $42.29. So, gold totaling $11.1 billion at the statutory price as of September 30th, 2010 was pledged as collateral for gold certificates issued and authorized to the Federal Reserve banks by the Secretary of the Treasury. So Walter, what the heck's going on here? Now, there's a mythology around that all the gold disappeared and it's gone. It's not no longer. It was just taken away, and it doesn't. But in fact, it's actually sitting there, held by the Treasury, and it is collateralizing the circulating Federal Reserve notes. Can you explain that a little further?
Well, first of all, good evening, global community. And let's qualify a few things on the gold first. When they did the assignment in '64 to the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Treasury assigned all of the gold down to the last ounce over to the Federal Reserve. Now, people in general, I've noticed, they have no idea of perspective. And if you took a look at the total ounces of gold based on the statutory price, you're at about $87 billion in value at the statutory price. Now, $87 billion is a grain of sand on the beach, as I think everyone should know when they see these trillions of dollars floating around, being traded, lent, bartered with. So, in reality, all of the gold in the U.S. Treasury, and people talking, well, is it there? Is it disappeared? Has it moved? Where is it? That's like saying, where are all the nickels in your pocket change jar? Back when they did the switch, they're really, probably less than 1%. When we had gold and silver currency, there was probably less than 1% of the gold and silver around to back the currency. So, they switched over to a fiat currency, the U.S. dollar, in '63. And what this did, it was kind of a smart move on their part because it gave the ability for unlimited expansion.
Yeah.
If the U.S. wanted to try to even back the currency with precious metals, even back in '63, '64, to have a one-on-one backing, prices would have soared through the roof to be able to buy the physical to back the currency.
And there again, when you say backing, that would mean that people could actually go in and demand their gold, but by collateralizing and taking the gold out of the public's ability to acquire by trading in the dollar, you now have basically, as you say, you now have an unlimited amount of fiat currency that you can print based on the collateral as opposed to the ability to trade it in.
And the most important thing where people lose perspective also, all a currency is a bartering tool, period. It's a piece of paper with ink printed on it. In countries like Northern Africa, where you have these warlords, they'll print up hundreds of millions and billions of their currency, while it still has some type of value as they buy up all of the hard goods, gold, silver, land, property, businesses, causing massive inflation until their currency takes, 1 trillion, whatever, to buy a loaf of bread. The U.S., the dollar, they, try to keep value to the bartering tool by how much they put out into circulation, how much they draw back from circulation. So if they draw back from circulation, people are struggling to get dollars, thus the value is maintained.
All right, Walter, thank you. Stay with us here, and we'll go into this a little further. The difference between collateral and backing, so important. Stay with us.
of all, let me take just a moment to thank you for allowing me back into your homes. If this is your first time with us, let me extend a personal invitation. Let's build a happy little cloud. Let's build some happy little trees. There are no limits here. You start out by believing here is in your world.
All right, folks, welcome back. Again, you're in the Corporation Nation. Thanks for joining me today. Again, with me is Walter Burien of Kafir1.com. Walter, before we go on here, let's just qualify for the audience one very important aspect of what's happening with gold and what happened with the collection or hoarding of gold. And what's your best estimate? Just considering all factors, what would be your best estimate as to who is the main holder of the majority of gold in the world? Give me a percentage. Let's say 80, 70, 90% owned by governments and corporations and the rich families.
But just a quick note on the currency. So, I was talking about the dollar. The people are also conditioned. They've been using dollars all their lifetime. But, their land, their house, their car, they could sell it in Swiss franc, German mark, British pounds, any currency they so desire. They could barter it for gold, silver, land, property, cattle, bushels of soybeans, whatever bartering tool they want to use. So the dollar is strictly a bartering tool, and no one is locked into it as if it's the only name available. But on the gold, back in 63, 64, when they went off the silver standard and gold standard, the large commercial banks and a few of the large families and a few countries started buying up all of the physical gold. And, basically, statutory price, went to, $65, $80, $90, $115, $134. But the majority they were buying was usually between $115 and $134, and, it jumped up to the $175 mark, 1974. But South Africa, people heard promoted on the news, sanctions due to racial inequality. And, I spent 8 months over in South Africa, went all through the country. It's one of the nicest places in Africa. In fact, just as we have a problem where everybody's trying to get across from Mexico into the United States, South Africa has the same problem where all of the Africans from Northern Africa are trying to get into South Africa because it's got the highest standard of living. The reason for the sanctions was South Africa was known to have half the known gold reserves underground. And they put the pressure on South Africa with the sanctions to get them to pick up their gold production. The government owned the majority of the mines. When I was over there, I sat down and talked to Dr. Lowell Alberts, who was the head of Energy and Mineral Affairs on several occasions. And he broke out the gold production reports. Prior to the sanctions, they were at about 25 to 35 tons a month. At the peak of the sanctions, they had picked up their gold production to 580 to 625 tons per month. And they were selling about 300-400 tons a month to subsidize, their entire economy. But on the gold aspect, the large commercial families were buying up as much of the physical as they could get their hands on. The banks, large commercial banks in a few countries. If you look at a country such as Thailand, which has basically been amassing gold for 6,000
centuries. Yeah.
Yes, longer. The millenniums. They did a smart thing over in Thailand. The government cannot touch the gold. The only one who has charge of the gold are the Buddhas. And the Buddhas own the majority of all the gold in Thailand. And they live a life of poverty, but they're sitting on actually, a few thousand tons. I think 6,000 tons is what the reported.
So it's all tied up in artwork and statues and that sort of thing.
No, they have physical bullion, statues, and big ingots and so forth. But the only time they're allowed to release the gold is in the event of invasion, to arm the populace and fight back the invasion, or natural disaster. So the Buddhas are the only ones that will sell the gold. Outside of that, they stockpile. India, Silver. They're known for silver. They have more silver in India than probably the entire United States has. But when you look at who's been hoarding the commercial banks, the big families, and a few of the countries, you broke down percentages, they're probably sitting on about 85%, somewhere roughly around there, of the physical gold. The population owns very little. In fact, the big run-up, $1,600 an ounce, you have a few people out there with 20 Burien or, someone who's lucky, maybe 100. Oh my God, look at the fortune I just made. Sheesh. That's, grain of sand on the beach. The big profit makers were, these large institutions and countries and families that bought in from 64 forward, that are sitting on the majority, that 85% of the physical quantities.
Well, it's ironic. It's ironic because they collateralized the dollar with gold, and then, of course, they used that fiat currency, which, the paper itself is not necessarily, it's not value.
Well, there's no value whatsoever with the currency, so to say, as a paper. The value is the intrinsic value.
Right.
Of the government and the assets of the country.
And the bottom line is that government has been using that fiat currency to buy up everything. That's the crazy part about it.
Mid-stride.
What's that?
Yeah, and that's right. As they shifted into the fiat currency basis, government would collect taxation that's, save about, 3, 4, 5% and invest it in good year, maybe 7, 8%. And each year they'd be investing, 4 or 5%. My favorite expression is there's only so many nickels in a dollar. Over a few decades, government became the primary player in the banking, insurance, equities market, and, little bit by little bit, they took over the marketplace, where the entire private sector combined is virtually insignificant compared to the collective government investment holdings.
And we're talking real estate. We're talking, just about everything, foreign currencies, gold, silver.
Yeah, 1982, they offshored a lot of the investment portfolios to start investing internationally, Thailand, Mexico, Russia, China, Vietnam, Israel, Australia. Collectively right now, it's somewhere at about 42, somewhere between 35 and 42 trillion dollars is invested globally. And in fact, the largest profits were coming back from countries like China, Mexico, and so forth. When the people were sitting there for the last 30, 40 years, those corporations are screwing us, all the businesses going over to Mexico and then China. Oh, don't they have any consideration? Well, you have to look at who was the primary investor. And the primary investor was collective government investment funds. They were the ones, reaping the whirlwind on these investment returns.
Well, let me have you qualify something here, Walter. Now, a lot of people would listen to what you just say and say, wait a minute, the stock market, for instance, is not, it doesn't have $50 trillion worth of things to invest in. Now, when you say there's that much investments across the world, we're not just talking about stock, we're talking about...
Collective government, domestic and international, is about $110 trillion as of 2008. And the best thing for someone to do, which you've done many of times, pull up a large pension fund capper and look at the diversification of the holdings. They'll be invested in the domestic equities, international equities, real estate projects, shopping malls, commercial buildings, bonds, loans to corporations. There's the full plethora of diversification is there, and it breaks down each category. And when people look for the first time, they say, "Oh my God, I never had a clue."
That's exactly what happened to me. And when we get back, I want you to explain the advent of CalPERS International and how those investments are actually hidden. We'll be back.
He's a rebel and a runner. He's a signal turning green. He's a restless young romantic, wants to run the big machine. He's got a problem with his poisons, but we'll find a cure. He's cleaning up the systems to keep
folks, welcome back. You've reached the Corporation Nation. I'm Clint. With me is Walter Burien. Walter, explain to me how this works. You know, I will look constantly at the CalPERS CAFR or the New York Investment Fund, or for that matter, Florida, big pension funds. And they list their assets individually in what's called the, I believe it's the asset, I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's posted in a lot of my blogs. Because again, it has a wow factor for people, and it's I watch people's eyes light up with understanding when they see how much stock government actually has collected.
And where.
Right, and that's universally in every country around the world. Everybody doesn't understand
and
that
not just stocks, but they'll own condos on the beach and
But the question, exactly. The question I have for you is, I'm only seeing CalPERS of California. So what happened in the 80s with CalPERS when CalPERS split and became an international corporation?
Keep in mind, again, perspective. More money was, people have to get it through their brains that their cities, their counties, their states are bringing in more money than Midas ever dreamed about in his wildest dream. And, when people say, oh, the Powerball, if I win the Powerball, it's $400 million. Yeah, well, check your local city, see how much they bring in a month. A large city, that'd be 2 weeks take for them. You have to, perspective. Okay. So, when things were growing, and you had this massive expansion and constant takeover of all of the assets, by collective government, little bit by little bit, they wanted to be able to hit the international arena. So in 1982, a transmittal letter went out to all local government pension fund managers all across the country, and there's thousands, tens of thousands of different individual government pension funds. And basically the transmittal letter said, you and local governments have very odd and peculiar rules regarding the management of your pension funds. Most of you are not allowed to trade in derivatives, calls, puts, futures, advanced foreign currency options. And this,
in other words, all of the toxic assets that we have today?
Derivatives. And they said CalPERS has just gone into CalPERS International. And if you participate with CalPERS International, in so many words, you will not be subject to those pesky little rules. And, so in 82, they started creating the major market maker, what I call the Major Market Makers Fund internationally. Now, CalPERS International was set up as a transfer and assignment agent. So they move the money for different groups for allocation all over the globe. Switzerland, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, Cayman Islands, wherever. And, they assign X amount of equity to the funds. Now, if you pull up the annual financial report for CalPERS International, it'll show low balances, 52 billion, 38 billion, 41 billion. And that being, at the end of the year, they draw down their sitting balances. They're not showing what they have brought in and assigned. They're showing their standing balances, what's in for transfer and what's coming back in for allocation back to the local governments. If you actually could track down the monies they've assigned since 82, you're up in the trillions of dollars internationally. And in 82, when they started this, and they got about $1.5 trillion, $2 trillion under management, scattered all over the globe. Mexico was the first target. They used the offshore funds to destabilize the Mexican currency, the peso, drove it down through the floor. Now, anyone who's a little bit older listening to your show, they'll remember back in the mid-'80s, news headlines. Mexican peso hits a new low. Oh my God, Mexican peso hits another new low. Mexican peso at a new low. And when the Mexican government was crying uncle, the Fed stepped in saying, well, we'll bail you out with $50 billion if you pay us back in crude oil at $10 a barrel. Mexican government bid, their number one resource was crude oil. Then we got them for about a total of $135 billion on that deal, and didn't matter if crude went to $35, $40 a barrel; they still had to pay us back at $10 a barrel. But simultaneously, these offshore CalPERS International assigned funds came in, sank in about $485 billion into the Mexican economy, buying up companies, banks, insurance, real estate, manufacturing, produce. And they did so at the bottom of the peso. Now that they were pre-positioned, they backed off on driving the peso through the floor. Peso started rebounding, so they made a killing right there on the currency conversion rates. But they also, passed NAFTA, GATT, and so forth, opening up the floodgates for Mexican goods to start coming into the United States. Now, back in the end of the 80s, anything you picked up from Walmart and Kmart said Made in Mexico on the bottom of it. And, people were complaining, we're losing American jobs with all these goods coming in from Mexico. The common denominator, which they were not aware of, was these collective government funds were the number one profiteer off of those cheap Mexican goods coming into the United States. I looked at the profits they were making back then, and, you'd see 1,600%, 1,800%. Highest profit I saw was 4,100% for the year. A lot of 3,500% in the 2,000 range per year. I added up from when they started until a little over 4 years. They'd increased their market capitalization to about $5 trillion from about 485 billion to $5 trillion in a little over 4 years. That was their first taste of blood. The second target was the Soviet bloc countries, which we were always, battling back and forth with financially. Gorbachev, he was approached, and we had, things were going a little bit rough in the Soviet bloc countries financially, and we said, well, we'll sink in about $3 trillion into the Soviet bloc countries if you disband the Soviet Union and follow our blueprint and say you're going democratic. So Gorbachev announced he was going to disband the Soviet Union and go democratic. We sank in about $3 trillion into the Soviet bloc countries, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Russia. And, during that time period, a lot of the items you picked up in Walmart and Kmart said made in Poland, made in Russia, made in Czechoslovakia, made in Hungary. And, the returns weren't as good as it was in Mexico. They were averaging 85, 135%, but, still good rates of return. The big cherry to pick was China. In 99, 2000, after the Chinese were ready to come in line, Chinese are a little bit harder to deal with than the Soviets. Here you have an imperialistic communist country. So, but they came in line, and in 99, 2000, we sank in about $3 trillion into the Chinese economy, and then opened up the floodgates of Chinese goods. Keep in mind, those Chinese goods coming from manufacturing plants, which we were now heavily invested in, which now anything you picked up from Walmart and Kmart said made in China. All the computer companies made in China. Circuit boards made in China. Car parts made in China. Why? We were taking advantage of the cheap labor on the largest workforce on the planet, now turning away to kick out the best products they could at about 4 cents, 5 cents an hour pay. I think they're up to about 30 cents an hour now. But the profits were phenomenal. And, there were a lot of U.S. jobs lost. But if you look at the collective government investment funds, that $3 trillion that went in, it now has a market capitalization of probably about $15 trillion. So China is the number one country where the largest, collective government investment funds rest, federal and local. Now, you'll hear selected presentation promotions to the population. Oh, the trade deficit, oh, loss of jobs, oh, the Chinese are sitting on $2.5 trillion in reserves, oh, they can collapse the dollar. Yeah, I love it when I see idiots, posting on the internet. Oh, the Chinese have $2 trillion in dollars, and if they sell them all, they would collapse the dollar. Yeah, in reality, if we cashed in about $4 trillion of our market capitalization in China, and that meant converting it from yuan back into dollars. China would be about 2 trillion short. So you always have to look at the basics and the fundamental realities of what's taking place. They're never talked about, never discussed. There's a total vacuum and void maintained due to the money involved and the power involved.
Right. All right, Walter. Good explanation. We'll be right back, folks. Stay with us.
Money and meds. We control every aspect of your life through ideological hegemony. But if you think you need guns to stop tyranny, then what you waiting for? We've already stripped you of your liberty, privacy, civil rights, and dignity. You want some more?
I'm simply battling to understand what this unappealing object is all about. Battle's about. What the object is all about.
Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems in the form of energy. And then it explodes into this enormous collage.
All right, guys, welcome back.
Of what this present
And you're at the Corporation Nation.
what it feels like.
Now, Walter, I wanted to just make a point, because now we've kind of discovered how corporatism has basically taken over the world. I find it interesting because you said
government taking over corporatism.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the spreading of corporate governance. Basically, what's interesting about that, I've often gotten into arguments, which now I realize was kind of stupid, over what type of ism America is. Is it communism? Is it fascism? Is it socialism? Is it corporatism? Is it another ism? Which ism is it? And I finally realized that it's
opportunism.
Yeah. It's a perfect mixture, which is called democracy, of course. It's a perfect mixture of all of those things. And what's interesting about what you just said is that all those products are coming in from other countries, and they're turning America into a give-me state, basically a socialism. So government is giving us basically currency that can be printed in an unlimited fashion almost, and we are then spending that on the products that
they're profiting from.
Right. It's what a brilliant system, and this is why Russia decided that democracy wasn't such a bad thing, because you can make a lot more money.
Yeah, in Russia they said, "We are the state; we will take care of you." Right? But people were kind of slightly a little bit lethargic. No one was really running on the treadmill on optimum proficiency. So, following the capitalistic viewpoint, dangle the carrot, make them run faster and chase harder and smarter and sharper to, chasing the carrot, as you still tap off everything that's being produced. Russia looked at the United States and said, hey, they got more control than we do, and they're making 10 times as much. They wrote the better blueprint. Time to change. But one notation, going back to the dollar, which we were talking about earlier, you have to look at the intrinsic value. I sat down one time trying to figure out the intrinsic value of the United States. Yeah, that includes land, corporations, houses, the whole 9 yards, the valuation of the country. And I came up with about 1.6, maybe a little bit higher, quadrillion dollars in value. Now, the currency in circulation is just, a pittance of the intrinsic value. And that's what keeps the currency strong, because it's backed up by, valuable items to buy. And then the currency being used in the United States is the dollar. So, it keeps the value, or a good portion of its value, based on the total scope of the intrinsic value. And the intrinsic value is not in the dollar. Dollars is a bartering tool. The intrinsic value is actually in the hard assets. And land's a big one. But, if they tried to, increase the, they've been increasing the circulation of dollars, trying there, into the marketplace. But when you compare it to the intrinsic value, it's, money in circulation is very, 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 very small. In any country, Swiss franc, British pound, you have to look at the intrinsic value of all of our assets in the country. That's what usually maintains the value of the currency. Now, there's currency wars that'll take place where, a couple of countries gang up on one country, try to devalue their currency so they can buy up the goods at a cheaper price. Yeah, we've been fighting with China for the last 5 or 6 years. Even though we're profiting off of our pre-position investments in China, China has intentionally kept the value of their currency low. They've been price fixing the yuan to keep it low, so they'll sell more, sell more, sell more. And the United States was saying, we want you to go into an open currency where it's traded, you can buy it and sell it, and we want the yuan to start picking up some value because you have an unfair trade advantage continuing to keep your currency so low. And about 3 years ago, the Chinese finally capitulated a little bit, and they started backing the yuan by a pool of currencies. And now, a couple months ago, they said they're going to start building up reserves of other, EU monies and so forth. And what I always find amazing is you'll have these, idiots on the internet. Oh my God, the Chinese is going into a pool of currency. They want to destroy the dollar. Oh. And in reality, the U.S. government's been twisting their arm nonstop to go into pools of currency, to open up the yuan for trading, so it would help alleviate the unfair trade advantage that China had through price fixing. Government and the big wealth aspect of what's been going on, the easiest way is to keep everybody off in la-la land, not even looking at the basics. Or try to, throw out a whole bunch of garbage that, confuses the hell out of everybody, so they're pulling their hair out saying, I can't take this anymore. I always say, look at the fundamental basics. I've had thousands of people call me over the last couple of years regarding their city, their county, their state. Our city's raising our taxes, our state's raising our taxes, our school district's raising our taxes. And they can go on and on and on for hours, and right down to the Queen of England took it all over to the Bar Association. 1815, they did this. 1936, they did this. And I've learned to stop them. And I'll stop them and I'll say, I got a few questions for you. And they'll say, what? I'll say, do you know how much cash you have in your pocket? Yeah, why do you want to know? I said, I don't want to know. I want to know if you know how much cash you got in your pocket. Yeah, I know exactly how much money I got in my pocket. You know where your checking account balance is? And they'll say, yeah. I'll say, do you know approximately the value of your investments? And they'll say, yeah. What about your net worth? Do you have a good idea what that is? I have a really good idea what my net worth is. And then I'll say, well, you just told me about your city, county, state, or school district. I'll say city. How much cash did your city bring in last year? No idea. Take a guess. I can't. Why? Don't have a clue. What about their investments they're sitting on? No idea. Take a guess. I can't. Why? Don't have a clue. What about their net worth? No idea. Take a guess. I can't. Why? Don't have a clue. So what's basic and fundamental to each and every one of us every day of our lives, since we're little kids, up until when we die, unless we get Alzheimer's, we always keep running a total of how much cash we have in our pocket, our checking account balance, the value of our investments, and approximately what our net worth is. Here, they've created an entire vacuum and void in an entire population not to even look at or think about or discuss the basics. They're always sidetracked. Intentionally so, due to the money involved. I find it amazing they could pull that off, but they did. And if you look at the comprehensive annual financial report, keep in mind all that is, it's an annual financial report. Their statement of net worth of what's developed, since inception. Microsoft, Johnson & Johnson puts out a annual financial report. And in fact, if you own one share of stock in any of the Fortune 500 companies, it's mandatory by SEC law. They send you a copy of their annual financial report each year. Here, government, not a peep, not a mention, not a word, for over 65 years. And to be able to hold back your annual financial report from an entire nation for 65 years, it required the full cooperation of the syndicated media, controlled education, and both political parties. Not a peep, not a mention, not a word. Kind of obvious they had that. And, they were sent the reports, for the last 45 years.
The media was sent the reports, right?
Yeah, when I first found out about this, I thought it was some big exclusive racket, and I called the mailroom. I was in New Jersey. I called the mailroom in the state of New Jersey who sent out the camper, and I wanted to know who they sent it to. Sir, I can't read that. Read you that list. It's too long. I said, well, how many reports do you send out? It was like 4,000. And I said, well, who do you send it out to? And she goes, well, we have three categories, media, education, and general. Under general, all the congressmen, senators got one, or anyone who requested. Under media, every editor of every paper up and down the East Coast and across the country got a copy. The networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, I noticed like 117 to ABC, 87 to CBS. And so how can they get so many? Well, they distributed one to the CEO and every one of the directors for the networks. Education, the colleges, universities, school districts got one. And in fact, all the colleges, universities, and school districts produce their own annual financial report.
And of course, the universities would want them because they're also very used as big investment tools as well, being funds, I should say.
Yeah, the only small group that was excluded from the loop was the entire population of the country.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Walter. Walter's going to be with us next hour as well, so stay tuned. We still need to uncover this 50-year plan with gold.
Don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are men. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful. Let us use that power to make this life a wonderful adventure. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world to do away with greed. A world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass and dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Let us all unite.
All right, folks, welcome back here on the Corporation Nation. And today with me is Walter Burien of Kafir1.com. Walter, I wanted to get back into the gold aspect here because I find this very, very fascinating subject. I want to read again from the Federal Reserve where it says the Congress has specified that the Federal Reserve banks must hold collateral equal in value to the Federal Reserve notes that the Federal Reserve banks put into circulation. Okay, and then again from the comprehensive annual financial statement for the Fed, which states that gold certificates were valued at $11 billion as of September 30th, 2010, which are included in Note 19. Treasury may redeem the gold certificates at any time. That's about all that matters in this point. So the question that I have for you...
Keep in mind that the T-bills they're holding are also considered collateral.
Right. There's a lot of things that are actually listed as collateral in the report. Foreign currency is another aspect of that. But what I wanted you to explain to people, because I found this to be the ultimate fraud. So you got a bunch of gold sitting in the vaults of the Treasury.
Right. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the physical gold's sitting in the Treasury. It doesn't matter if it's out of the Treasury. The Federal Reserve owns it all by those gold certificates that were issued.
Right.
Since 64, the Federal Reserve was swapping those gold certificates back and forth, trading them and making a bloody fortune. Well, I kind of passed the word in 2000 to many circles, and Congress actually got their act together. And in 2000, they passed a law that any profit the Federal Reserve made from trading the gold had to be deposited back in the U.S. Treasury. Yeah. So at least they did take a protective step there.
Right. So what you're saying basically is, like I said, the gold is sitting there. The value of the gold is portrayed in these, kind of like the fiat currency, but it's portrayed in these, or it's evidenced in these certificates. And was it the Federal Reserve or I guess it was Federal Reserve that was actually using those again to collateralize other dealings and making a fortune. And they were using it probably, I would imagine, at whatever the statutory or the
they would loan out the gold, based on the gold certificates. They were
trading paper.
Yeah, they were cross-swapping trading paper back and forth. And keep in mind, they control the price. I mean, the institutional government investment funds on the derivative activity, they can roll the price of gold up, they can roll the price of gold down, they can roll the price of any commodities up or down. They can intervene to suppress oil prices if they wanted to, or run them right through the roof. And they profit whether it's going up or going down. On the derivatives market, which I was a commodity trading advisor for about 14 years and traded for over 35, most people make big money on the downside. Yeah, the public only knows how to buy, because in their brains they say, well, if I buy a 1957 Chevy, fix it up, and then sell it at 3 times the value, I made money. You buy and sell. Well, on the derivatives market, you can buy or sell first. And if you want to drive a price down, cause it collapse, you go heavily short, then drive the price down, it collapses. You may lose on your physical holdings, but you make equally on your short derivative position. So whether it be the dollar, the stock indexes, or anything else, they drive them up, they drive them down, they profit on both
and
sides.
that's not to say that just happens in the U.S. market alone. And I mean, you've told me this before, that basically if they want to transfer out some money on the books, they can simply lose the money in dollars, create an offshore account that does the opposite investment and takes all that money through the trade, the commodities trade or whatever, and all of a sudden you have an offshore corporation that has all the money that once was in government's hands. Now it's in a government-owned corporation on the other side of the world, and it's erased off the books in America.
And a quick note I was thinking of when we were on break there, people look at the United States as, with welfare society, food stamps, all this money, hundreds of billions of dollars going out for support payments for a lot of people in the population. Well, they don't see the common denominator reality. What's happening there is the government, enjoys sending out that money because that money is spent and thus raises their profits on their investment holdings. So in reality, for all of that money that's doled out to the population, it comes right back into the government investment portfolios.
Yeah,
which then generates more taxes for them and more investment profits. I mean, and the common denominator equation is kept out of the brains of the population. Right. Now, as I mentioned, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, not a peep, not a mention, not a word. I mean, it was the largest cooperative effort for non-disclosure that's taken place, I would figure, on the planet to date. And, they had the full cooperation of syndicated media, controlled education, both political parties. Yeah, you don't see Rush Limbaugh coming out saying, I've been looking at these CAFR things, and our state was saying they're $700 million short in their budget, and I just looked at the CAFR, they're about $5 billion in the black. He'd find himself getting drug out into the back alley, what it on, and lose his radio broadcasting show because he broke.
I'll tell you, I've called into quite a few mainstream radio shows and have been cut off, and my voice never hit the air when I'm trying to talk about that. So I fully concur there.
Yeah, Rush Limbaugh has about a 45-second delay on his radio show.
Sure.
And there have been thousands of people that have called in to try to mention the CAFR. Second they do, snip. Never hits the air.
Well, and I'd invite the audience now that you've heard this to go ahead and do that, just to see for yourself how controlled that information is. And I also want to say, you say it's the cooperation of the media and everybody else, but it's also the cooperation, unfortunately and ironically, it's the cooperation of the people, because through our ignorance, through the purposeful obfuscation of this information, we give our consent for all of this to happen. Even the pensioners out there, by donating your money to these government pensions, building up
the power bases.
That also gives government the excuse to match those funds with taxpayer money, which is in the trillions each year. So it's a consensual thing by the people too, and I just want to make that clear. Now, I wanted to.
Can I sneak in a quick note?
Sure.
about a little over a year ago, I did a 2-hour show with George Norrie on Coast to Coast.
Ah, yes.
And the most important point I brought up during that 2-hour show, I said, George, do you know how I can steal, the easiest way for me to steal $100,000 from you? And his first response was, text me. I said, no, there's a much easier way. And he goes, what's that, Walter? I said, if you didn't know you had it in the first place. That's sunk in.
Yeah, that's it right there. If you don't know the money and the investments exist, then how can you possibly do anything about it, right?
And that's why I never mentioned, never worked for 65, 70 years. I mean, if the public was seeing the growth, seeing the expansion, they would have stopped it. And on the aspect of expansion, I looked at Arizona, 1983 on their capper, it was about a $1 billion service budget. Jump ahead 2008. They're up to about $62 billion, 6,000% increase. Population doubled during that time period, so let's knock it down to 3,000%. And personal income. Well, we'll cover this on the coming back from the break.
Absolutely. All right, guys, stay with us. You're in the Corporation Nation here on RBN. We'll be back.
Versus just ride. The world is like a ride. You think it's real, it's just a ride. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. The world is like a ride. You think it's real, it's just a ride. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. The ride goes up and down, round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored. It's up and down, round and round, and it's very loud. Don't worry, don't be afraid, it's just a ride. We can change it anytime we want.
All right, folks, welcome back.
Between fear and love.
Again, you're on the Corporation Nation. Again, we're with Walter Burien of Kaffer1.com. Highly suggest you peruse his website, and if you can, support his efforts. We're going to talk about what he's trying to do to harness all of this corruption and bring it back to the people in the next couple segments here. And we'll also take calls next segment. Walter, go ahead and finish your thoughts there.
Well, just a key point. I never like to call it corruption, even though it is. But, in reality, what it is greed and opportunity running unrestrained, with the public sitting off in la-la land, being masterfully entertained, looking at left field as the government boys are doing everything in right field. And they make sure the public is constantly distracted looking at left field, so they never have a clue of the basics. And keep in mind, these are all basics. But going back to Arizona, they increased the take by about 6,000% in 25 years. Population increased by doubled, so it's knocked down to 3,000%. And personal income went from about 10,100 to 30,000, 10,800 to 30,000. But then if you take off the extra taxes, fines, and fees and everything else, let's make it a 200% increase. So 1,500% increase at the take. So a 15-to-1 ratio. Government expanded their take compared to the population's income by a 15-to-1 ratio. That's unsustainable. And it's the standard across the country. Do you ever hear your politicians saying, well, we're short $700 million on our state budget this year? And do you ever hear them mention? Let's see, 4 years ago we were bringing in $22 billion. This year we're bringing in $28 billion. And the reason we're $700 million short is, we spent $9 billion. They're not going to qualify the degree of the increase of the take. And if you look at the intrinsic, very important point here, if you look at I hear people always saying, well, the dollar is devalued. If you look at 1919 and now, the dollar is, well, the one factor they're not throwing into the equation, if you looked at 1919, the intrinsic value, goods, possessions, property, if you had a 1,200 square foot home, you're living in a mansion back in 1919. One out of five families had a car. Now your horse and carriage had value, but if you look at the increase in the intrinsic value, large houses, companies, businesses, developments, infrastructure, the intrinsic value has probably increased by about 2,000% since 1919 till current. And, during that time period, the dollar, devalued, X percentage.
Sure, and is it important to say that that couldn't have been accomplished, all these wonderful things that we... with gold.
If we're using gold, no way in hell. It would never have happened. Government, though, on the greed and opportunity principle, hey, we're investing 5% a year. Hey, look how much we have after 10 years. Look how much we have after 40 years. Hey, we took over the friggin' world. Collectively, like I said, 5% a year is only so many nickels in a dollar. And, then they worked on their strategy, then by the 80s to start taking over internationally. China already tied the hands, so we were taking over the Chinese economy. And 2 years ago, the Chinese stopped any further investments from collective U.S. government or government-controlled corporations in China. They, for about a year, you couldn't invest any more money in China. Then the Chinese, being smart little cookies, reopened up the investment stream by saying, well, you can invest in China now, but under one condition. The Chinese government must have matching investments. So if we own 30% of a company, the Chinese government has to own 30% of a company. So, India, we were taking over their derivatives market. We were rolling it up, rolling it down, liquidating everybody else with their money. The Indian government came in and put in some severe and restrictive new laws on their derivative market regarding monitoring U.S. government funds and activities on their derivative market. A few controls. So I go back to those two words, greed and opportunity. When the public's being entertained off in la-la land and left field, they're conducting all the business as usual in right field. And keep in mind, government shill agents and government distraction is to talk about anything else except the basics. And in fact, what they like to do is promote debt. Oh my God, we're in debt. Picture if you had a neighbor and he's constantly knocking on your door. Can I borrow $500? Can I borrow $1,000? Can I borrow $5,000? You'd avoid him like the plague. If you thought he was knocking on your door, you'd cringe. Governments, cities, counties, states, they do the exact same thing.
And they don't ask.
And it has a very good psychological effect to their benefit. It causes people to back off. I don't want to hear it. Back off. Get away from me. I don't want you're taking more and more and more. I can't handle anymore. And they block it out of their mind. Now, if you had the population sitting there, hey, look, our city's sitting on a $750 million reclamation fund for the garbage dump. They have they're overfunded by $13 billion in their pension funds. They increased their take by 500% in the last 3 years. The public, all of a sudden, what? They're going to start looking, they're going to start digging, they're going to start turning over rocks, which is the worst scenario for government. So that's why, never a mention, never a peep, never a word, constantly keep the public off in la-la land looking at the exact opposite of reality. And if you keep it down to the basics, look at, your city, your school district. See how much they've increased their take over 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. How much they've increased their investment capital. What little liability funds they've been stashing away.
To put it easily. Very
important point. Okay, the government was not supposed to operate at a profit. The way they got around that was, if the city made a $100 million profit for the year from any of its operations, all they do is they'll take the $100 million, deposit it into a liability account, or create a new liability account, stroke of a pen, move it over to the liability account, and poof, there goes a $100 million profit, now designated as a liability. This is why you hear all these cities, counties, and states, oh, we have this liability, that liability, oh. And most of these liabilities are actually accounts they've created to be able to transfer their profits into as a holding grounds for them. Right.
So the simple way to say it is simply that the budget report comes out every year, and that shows the basically
a selectively created document that shows a 1 year projection of income and the cost on that selected presentation.
Right,
You can equate it to the budget for operating your house.
So it's basically it's basically the government saying, here's our checking account, don't pay attention to anything else. Meanwhile, in the CAFR, you see the savings account, the investment portfolio, you see everything else.
Not for a year, but what's developed maybe for 100 years, 150 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you got all these bonds.
It's the difference between your statement of net worth and your budget for operating your house.
Exactly.
And it's not, people call it two sets of books. It's not two sets of books. It is the book. If you look at a CAFR, it shows the budget in it and everything else. So the budget's an inferior document.
Yeah.
And that's why also the CAFR never mentioned, never repeat, never a word. And due to the money involved, keep in mind the corporate, the IBMs, the Apples, and everybody else, they're all bidding for the government investment funds. The government already owns a good chunk of their corporations.
And
so
remember,
they're not going to mention. They're going to be quiet.
Remember, folks, if you were to present to the IRS your budget report instead of your comprehensive annual financial report, you'd be in jail tomorrow. Government has different rules than us because they're the rule makers. They make their own rules and they can break them.
And look at the wealth involved.
Derivatives, quantitative easing, trade imbalances, recession, low GDP, nations close to collapsing, and subprime loans, foreclosed homes, and people's taxes spent to bail out too big to fail AAA banks again. Fear levels rising as the US crash seems imminent, having smashed the debt ceiling of 14 trillion. Despite protests and clashes in Athens streets, the IMF
all right, folks. Welcome back. Again, you've reached the Corporation Nation. With us is Walter Burien today. Now, Walter, I want to get to your TRFs, and I also want to take a couple calls. So let me just run this down real quick, and you give me any corrections or additions to this. Now, as far as your gold article, which I highly recommend people read, the 50-year plan, so you want a gold-backed currency. Basically, what we're saying here is the government has been over many years, 50 years, basically been hoarding gold, buying gold, creating new mining companies to mine new gold so that it can buy more gold. It has been hoarding it and now owns, between governments, corporations,
families,
wealthy families. You're basically saying that about
85% of the physical.
Right. So the people have their little trinkets every here and there. What you're saying is that now that they have such control over this massive commodity,
and they've created on paper the value of gold. Now, keep in mind, they can't sell it. If they try to move 10% of the physical gold that they have, there's very, very little actual gold being bought and sold.
Sure.
At these high prices, and if they try to unload 10%, I mean, the price would collapse down, $400 overnight and then $200. So the culmination of the 50-year plan, which, by the way, from my front page, you have to click on the articles page. Then on the articles page, you'll see just scroll down, you'll see a big stack of gold bullion, and that's the article. But to be able to unload the physical to culminate their 50-year plan, they have to be able to viably be able to sell it. And the only way they're going to be able to do that is if they can create a gold-backed currency in a large industrialized group of nations. So, what I'm expecting, my guess is the Amuro that's been on the drawing board for the last 15 years, will probably come out and they'll announce that it'll be a gold-backed currency. Now, if they issue $1 billion of Amuro, they have to buy $1 billion in gold. If they issue $100 billion in gold. This way, it gives the viability to unload. Now they can sell 10%, 15%, 20%, 25%, matching it with the purchases of the gold-backed currency. In other words, they're converting their gold into a sale, for exchange on this currency. Then once they're done unloading, which would be close to $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion in this new currency, and the price of gold will be up around $3,400, $3,200 at that point in time.
Sure.
Then the public becomes the bag holder. They're holding.
Well, and let's not forget who fixes the price of gold every day, which is the London fixing, right?
But keep in mind, keep in mind they're fixing the price based on the trading activity, and the trading activity is very small compared to the actual physical gold stored all over the world. So, if the people that owned all that physical gold try to, like I said, try to sell 10% of it, the price would collapse straight through the floor. So they don't. They've been inflating their book value, up to $1,600 an ounce.
But they were able to hold it at a very, very low price for that 40 years until 9/11.
Their average purchase is probably between $134 and $174 an ounce. So, they've locked in a 1,000, 1,200% profit.
And then it was time to raise the price.
Yeah, but now for the 50-year plan to come to a close, they have to be able to unload it and, to convert it from gold into some currency, Swiss franc, German mark, dollars, whatever. And, by issuing that gold-backed currency, whoever's buying the gold-backed currency now will become the bag holder, holding it.
Well, sure.
They'll make an appreciation in the first 6 months, 7 months. Maybe.
What's ironic, though, is that the London Gold Market Fixing Limited, on the premises of M.M. Rothschilds and Son, will still be fixing the price.
Yeah, well, you have the London Gold Fix, you have the New York Gold Fix, you have the Zurich Gold Fix, the Hong Kong Gold Fix. They all
sure. They all have a conference call every day to see what they're gonna do with gold. But the problem with that is wait. The problem with that is that now they've sold their gold. They've got massive, massive wealth now, but what are they going to do then? Are they going to crash gold again and then rebuy gold and do the whole thing?
The public just bought it. The public converted by buying the gold-backed currency. I mean, they gave the ability for these large families, countries, and so forth to unload a good chunk of their physical gold by selling it to back the currency. And now the public becomes the bag holder. Now you'll see the other fiat currencies go up in value and the gold currency go down in value once the public is the bag holder. They get stuck again. But when we're on breaking in, I thought of a very important little exercise to give everyone. How many people have heard the expression, "It's for the children"? How many times have you heard that, Clint?
Yeah, absolutely. I call it the greatest political tool ever conceived, pun intended.
Last 70, 80 years. It's been the number one buzzword. It's for the children. Well, I'm going to give everybody a basic exercise. About 10, 11 months ago, I put out an email post. There was a school district up in upstate New York someone brought my attention to who have been raising their taxes for the school district. Well, I looked at the school district's CAFR, and I saw what their total budget was. I want everyone to do this for their school district. Okay, just look at what the budget is for the year. And then look, it shows total students, kindergarten, through 12th grade, listed in the school district. Then take the total number of students and divide it by the budget of the school district, which will give you the average cost per student for the year. And keep in mind, this is kindergarten through 12th grade. And for the school district in New York, it came out to $34,300, I think, per student.
All right, listen, Walter, I want to take some calls, and I also really want to give you a chance to go over your tax retirement funds. I think that's a very, with all the problems.
We're back. I think Homeland Security didn't like what I was saying, and they cut the call for a second.
Well, that'll be the third time on my show after less than 2 weeks that it's been cut off. So, hey.
It's a very important point, because anyone can do this. Pull up your school. Everybody's been hearing, we need more money for the kids, need more money for the school district. Well, find out the basic fundamental reality. Get the school district's budget, look at the total number of students, divided by the school district's budget to come up with a cost per student. And on the short article I put out 10 months ago regarding this upstate New York school district, I put in the bottom line, $34,000 per student should the kids kindergarten through high school be required to be gold-plated each year.
Well, and then also picture in your mind what the old schoolhouses in the country looked like, and think about the budget they had.
Yeah, well, when I looked at, 15 years ago, the Midwestern, Iowa, little mom and pop school districts, which had very low budgets and very low cost per student, were actually getting the highest rates and best results. The ones that had the most money flooding in were getting the worst results. And you have to look at basics. What are they doing? They're increasing and padding their own pockets using the buzzword. It's for the kids.
It's for the kids, for the children.
But you can do that basic exercise. So simple. I guarantee you, anyone listening to the show, no one's ever done that before. And it's so
Walter, listen up, man. No child left behind, dude. What are you thinking?
Core. And how many people know Core is from India-based corporation?
Yeah. Hey, listen, Walter, just want to take a call real quick. Rev from Colorado, you've been holding on like a champ. How you doing?
This is Bo Scout Reb Team. We're known to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We've been on a document of the Department of Defense. This has everything to do with what you're talking about. 32 months and it's linked to twitter.com/Bubba Scout Reb, known to we're approved by U.S. Army War College. This is by U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency. What you're talking about, you can't get control of credit and debt. Therefore, you can't control any kind of like monetary fluctuation or in any way stability. That's what we're about, stability and order. And
I'll tell you what, say your website again, your Twitter. Was it Twitter?
Twitter.com/Bubba Scout Reb, BUBBASCOUTREB, for stability and order. It says so right on the official document. DODLive.mil, Chairman's Corner of the Joint Chiefs.
All right, man. Well, thanks for your call. Go to someone that has a question for Walter. Richard in Washington. Are you there, Richard?
Yeah. Now that I've got two of the greatest minds together, I want to present something. You both say definition of words is most important and follow the money. So in that trend of thinking, we had the Persian Empire and the Egyptian Empire kind of came together when Alexander the Great tried to conquer the world. We then had the words democracy, city-state, philanthropy created, and then he failed, and Rome kind of took over from the Greeks. Now we have the word citizen come in, and we have a failure there, even though...
All right, Richard, hold on a second. We're coming to a break, and we'll let you finish that thought. Folks, welcome back. Little segment of Corporation Nation today with Walter Burien. Richard in Washington. Hey, listen, we have very limited time, so if you have a question, please ask it.
And I have a comment for Richard after he gets done there.
Well, that's it. Just to finish up, we had the Roman Empire, Caesar's Messiah, so Titus was really Jesus. And
all right, listen, I'm going to let you go because you're not sticking to the subject here. You're not getting to your point. A complaint people make about me in my writing quite often, so don't be offended. If for callers in the future, please stick to try to make it a reasonable. Try to use the time reasonably. Walter, what did you have to say?
Clint, yes. And I did pull one thing out of what Richard was saying, which brought to mind something I learned about 3 or 4 weeks ago. It just dawned on me. He was mentioning the Roman Empire.
Yes.
Which I think was in existence for about 625 years before it, collapsed. But, the Roman Empire took over 2/3 of the known world during their reign, and they conquered and pillaged one country after another. And what dawned on me 3 to 4 weeks ago, when you look at, I used the word intrinsic value, and at the beginning of the show perspective, if you look at what they actually conquered in intrinsic value, what the Roman Empire took over that 625 years, it's not even equal to what collective government, federal and local, brings in each year now. So here, the entire Roman Empire, which was in existence for about 625 years, keep in mind the population was much smaller back then, what they brought in over that entire 625 years is not equal, in intrinsic value, is not equal to what collective government today brings in 1 year in the United States. Let that point sink in.
Yeah. Well, It's almost like a singularity. The technology and everything is, and the power of the military, the power of transport, the power of, jets and everything else. Pretty soon we'll just be teleporting soldiers and take over countries. I mean, it's like a singularity. It's going to just all of a sudden be one big government, right?
Yeah, well, keep in mind, you're talking a massive, massive amount of wealth. Keep in perspective, like I said, your city, your county, your states bring in more money than might have ever dreamed about. And everybody's heard of the Tower of Babel. In your states, they build a new Tower of Babel, 2 or 3 of them a year, which make the original Tower of Babel look like a hobo shanty shack. People have to have perspective. Yeah. And, when you have this free-for-all taking place within government, public being entertained off in la-la land with one distraction after another to not look at, and an entire void created in the basics that are fundamental to each and every one of us in our own personal lives, that's why we have the problems, we have right now. And to make things worse, we have primarily 70% attorneys that have jumped into the political structure that are running the entire show in concert with the judiciary to protect them, to make sure that they don't have any consequences for their next wealth acquisition scheme. There's so much money being generated and held, and if with the public not even looking at the basics, these guys on the inside track have been laughing down to the bank every single day for the last 100 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the public, debt, throwing on the public, debt.
We, like I say often, we still want to live in this history of how things used to be and how the country was founded and all this. We are not in that time anymore. We are in a time of technology and massive profits and wealth just through paper. I mean, it's just not the same.
Yeah, and another important point, which you probably I don't know if you've learned this or not yet, Clint, but if you haven't, definitely look at it. The old-timers, World War I, World War II, the ones that were running the show and the Treasury Department and so forth, and when the country was being founded at the end of the 1800s, 1700s, they tried to create laws and policies that would protect the American population, to try to focus the wealth into directly benefiting the American population. And over the years, the gangs that have been jumping in the government have circumvented all of the protections that were drafted into, the finances and the financial structure of the United States. I mean, if you go back into 1910, 20s, 30s, 40s, the old-timers in government wrote restrictions, especially on government pension funds. They knew that this would amass to, super phenomenal fund bases in each state. They restricted that they could not invest outside of the United States more than 5 or 10% of their capital. Because they knew to have a thriving economy and to benefit the United States, that investment capital should be reinvested in the United States. Well, over the last 3 or 4 decades, they've circumvented all the laws to totally bypass that. And, if they wanted to invest 30%, 40%, 50% outside of the country, they have, and have done so.
So in other words, we're in the middle of a war fighting imperialists from taking over the world, in just a short period of time.
We're fighting greed and opportunity unrestrained.
Yeah. And in a short period of time, we became the imperialists and started taking over the world.
I mean, just greed and opportunity unrestrained. I mean, when I first started National Disclosure in June of '98, for the next 2 years, I always used to give one example. If your local bank left the doors open over the weekend, all the cash lying on the counter, cameras on the counters, the cameras turned off, you could have 1,000 people walk by, and the front door is wide open. And they look, and they say, hey, bank doors are open. Look, all the cash is lying on the counter, and there's no one guarding it. Some would try to close the doors. Some would try to call the bank saying, you got a big problem here. 65% would mill around outside saying, should we? And all it takes is 4 or 5 out of 1,000 to walk by saying, hey, look at all these bozos, they left the cash on the counter, no one guarding it, look at all these clowns outside, no one's taking it. Let's grab it before somebody else does. And when you let those 4 or 5 out of 1,000 walk in the doors of government 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you get exactly what you have today, greed and opportunity unrestrained. And for them to maintain their game, it's essential to keep the public distracted off in the la-la land with garbage So they never look at the fundamental basics. And keep in mind, this whole game of government, the whole takeover, the whole expansion routine is all fundamental basics. How much cash are they bringing in each year? Total investments held, where they're invested, domestic, globally. They're increasing the take. They're increasing their growth. And it's all basics. And no one is looking, because it's an intentionally created void to keep them from looking at
it. All depends on our ignorance, which is why you are here today and why you have spent the latter part of your lifetime trying to expose this, and then you dragged me into it, darn it.
Yeah.
And now I'm trying to do the same, trying to talk some sense into people. That hopefully, after today's show, and I'll have to have you back, Walter, and I know that your time is precious, but we have to get into your tax retirement funds, and we only have about a minute left.
Oh my God! Let me say something real quick.
Sure.
Okay, I've gotten probably 200-300 calls from college professors, teachers from schools. After I give them the briefing, I said, "Can you picture if you had your 8th grade class and you said, class, here's our school district's budget report. Here's our school district's comprehensive annual financial report. Let's see if we can spot the differences." That teacher would find her walking paper so damn fast she wouldn't know what hit her.
Well, especially with Common Core standards, that would be a no-no. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Walter, again, man.
Can't create a cognitive thought of the basics.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, let's take, just real quick, Fred in Michigan, if you're still there, my friend.
Clint, yes. Yes, Clint, super stellar, every one of your interviews, and especially Walter. And when Walter returns, I'd like him to maybe give a report on what Andy Gauss and Karen Hudes, K-A-H-U-D-E-S, the World Bank attorney, who said that on deposit at the Bank of Hawaii and other locations, 170,000 metric tons of gold bullion. And then Andy Gauss says, well, we need to assimilate the Federal Reserve operations into the U.S. Treasury, substitute U.S. Treasury notes for Federal Reserve notes, give that back to the Federal Reserve banksters, and basically kick them out of the country, but repossess the 47 Gulfstream jets and their $2 billion art collection.
Yeah, well, keep in mind, the Congress could change the law at any time it wanted to, and basically say that, okay, your gold certificates are now going to be paid back in boogers. I mean, that's what could happen. All right? So, hey, Walter, thanks again, man. We are at the end of our time together, but you will be back because people demand it. CAFR1.com is website. Thank you, Walter.
You have a great night there, Clint.
You too, my friend. Take care, folks.